All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. We're having some technical difficulties with our camera, but seem to got that squared away. Thank you for being here this morning as well and being online. We're continuing our series on the life of Christ. I've enjoyed it. I don't know about you, but it's been eye-opening to see a lot of these things that I'd never noticed before. When you go into and study these things versus just reading them, big difference on what you can grasp from all of the content that's in the Bible. It's remarkable that God can convey a message with so little words, but make them so poignant and so meaningful that we can probably take more advantage of all of that. So today we're going to be talking about the silent years. So I'm going to remain silent now for the next 40 minutes. I'm just kidding. So it's going to talk about our lesson text is going to be from Matthew chapter 2 and Luke chapter 2. The events that take place in there, we're going to have the flight into Egypt and the persecution from Herod and the return to Nazareth. So that's the topic that we'll discuss this morning. I'd like to start with reading Matthew chapter 2, starting at 13. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed unto Egypt. And there was until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceedingly wroth, and set forth and slew all of the children that were in Bethlehem and all the coasts thereof, from 2 years of age and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then he fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. It starts off with an angel talking to Joseph to get out of Bethlehem. Do we remember why that happened? Herod, the decree that he had. It was talking about the wise men that were mocking him. So Satan here is trying to stop or trying to kill Christ through Herod. This angel of death, or this person that comes in the form of evil, is trying to stop Christ's advent to the cross. And it starts at his birth. And it persecutes him throughout his life. Satan is relentless. So here we have Satan tries to stop. It's the full power on to stop him. You can see that this started back in Genesis chapter 3, and Satan has been busy ever since. And now it's the realization that this Christ that's been born, that's been talked about and knowing about for hundreds and thousands of years, has come true. First thing he tries to do is kill him physically. Now this child is human. I'm going to destroy it. And here's the angels is talking to Joseph, and Joseph is now in a dream hearing these words coming from this angel. And what is the first thing that Joseph does? He packs up and leaves. He trusts the angel. The angel has given him good advice in the past. He is now taking this strongly this time because of that added piece that Herod is going to destroy your son. So they pack up, no hesitation, total obedience, and they leave by night. And it makes you wonder why these angels are here. Why not just destroy Herod? Why not just like at the cross where Jesus could have called 10,000 angels? But he didn't. All these prophecies of the Old Testament have to ring true. And there are prophecies about this event. The Magi that came to visit, what did they bring? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Those are expensive spices and minerals. These gifts would probably, God's provisionings would help them suffice in Egypt while they're gone. He was a carpenter. He was a poor carpenter from Nazareth. He didn't have the money to travel 200 miles into Egypt. These things that the Magi brought were helpful, sustaining them. But I was curious on why Egypt. Why did he take them to Egypt? It really doesn't explain, but it does fulfill a prophecy. And that's what's important. It doesn't matter why God chooses where he wants us to go. It's the matter of us obeying him and doing it. Flight into Egypt could be reminiscent that I am going to have my son experience the same thing that you did hundreds of years ago with the famine that took place. How Egypt was there to help you, with Joseph being in a position of power. And now here is Jesus going to Egypt. Why not Syria, or why not Babylon? Why not India? Why not Cleveland? It doesn't matter. He told them to go to Egypt. Egypt has always been up and down relationship with the children of Israel. He tells them all the time that you were in bondage while you were in Israel. Israel was in Egypt. And now I'm going to remind you again that it was I, God of the heavens, is the one that rescued you from that same bondage. Over and over again. So now Herod's not taking this lightly. He doesn't understand because Joseph received this message from an angel at night. So he's over there, he packs up his wife, he packs up his child, then they go to Egypt. And then Herod offers this decree that I want you to kill every child that you find in Bethlehem and surrounding coasts. Put that into perspective. Bethlehem's not a big city. This is probably after everybody left because of the taxing. But now you have a large number of people that are in that city, and how many male children 2 years of age and younger that had to die because of Herod's decree. And is it that barbaric? It is. It is a barbaric request. That's Satan doing whatever he can to make sure that his will is being taken out. Herod is the perfect man for this job because he had 3 of his, how many sons? 9. 3 of his 9 sons were executed. This man has no respect for life. He wanted to make sure that his power that he worked so hard for and killed so many people for stayed right where it was. He did not want to lose any of that. So he killed as many as he could. And this was satisfying the prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 31. And that's at the very end of that, where it was talking about Ramah and Rachel. Ramah is a city. And then where does Rachel fit in? It says, Ramah, there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children. Who was Rachel's child? Who were her children? Joseph and Benjamin. They ended up being the two southern tribes. This is where we're talking about here. Rachel is weeping for her children, the condition that they're in. This is Christ out of the tribe of Judah. So many things that we look over that are so meaningful. You can have a whole study just on that event right there. On that, what's the meaning behind Rachel and her weeping and the crying over this child and the condition of Israel at the time. But he picks 2 years of age, and that's casting a wide net. Because at this time, how old was Jesus? 40 days, 50 days at the most. But he sends out a net big enough to make sure that he encompasses every possible male child in that area. He didn't want to overlook anyone. He figured he couldn't miss. And the surrounding areas were all small cities, and they figured, commentaries say, anywhere from 12 to 50 children were eliminated by this decree. And it makes you want to ask, and a lot of people do ask, why didn't God save these children? That's pointing a finger, isn't it? It's God's fault. God could have just reached down, struck Herod dead. The decree would have been over. And those babies would have been saved. God has always been just, righteous, and long-suffering. We have to believe in that. Yes, Emmett. He does own everything. He has our best interest in heart. And you got to remember that justice is at judgment. It's not our responsibility to do that. God is going to always look after us. We have a tendency, because of we don't understand that or not patient enough to follow through, that we always try to blame somebody. God is the easy mark. We blame him for everything that goes wrong in our lives. Sorry. Yep. And that's what Brother Greg is saying, that even though those children did suffer persecution and death, they're now in God's hands, innocent, martyrs for the cause. But it is a human thing that we see a little picture in the scope of things, and it's very personal. It's my life. What are you doing to me? God's big picture. He sees everything all the time. The events that happen in my life may be insignificant to the bigger picture. But it is a matter of fact that it's standing here at this point in time, it is a bigger picture. Never thought I was going to be here. Things like that motivate me. Give me an opportunity now. What can I do to make sure that I am doing what I can while I am alive? I am not blaming anybody for anything in my situation other than myself. Those are my decisions that are made. Same thing with Herod. We have these opportunities. God is giving us free will. Free will happens all the time. We make decisions constantly that may or may not affect what others do. We always blame God for a drunk driver or a natural disaster or a drive-by shooting. We always seem to do that. Did you remember the Jonestown massacre? Do you know how many children died in that massacre? Over 900 people died in that event, and 300 of them were children. Where's the outrage? Did we blame God for that? Jim Jones. People had a decision. It is what we do with it. Because God, think about it, all the prices that God had paid to be at this moment, war after war, battle after battle, persecution after persecution, all of that. God paid a price so we can have this freedom. He's doing that to preserve the cross. That event, all those things that the angel coming to Joseph and saying to flee to Egypt, keep this child safe. Egypt was a Roman territory at that time. But he did. He listened. He preserved the events to take place to go to the cross at Calvary. So once Herod has been appeased and all of those children die, there seems to be some small level of peace up until a point where it comes back, starting at verse 19. Let's see. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, starting at verse 19, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the young child and his mother and came to the land of Israel. And when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee, and came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. It's talking about Herod dying. Herod the Great is dead. The angel returns to Joseph, lets him know that. And then who's in his place is Archelaus. Where does Archelaus fit in? He's actually, what is he? The fourth son of Herod. He killed two of them before him, his older brothers. He had 9 wives. So he had older brothers that were executed. So now it's his turn. He was a young kid. They say he was around 18 to 20. But he was tyrannical. He was evil. He was cruel. But he didn't last long. He was the eldest child of his fourth wife, and he only had about an 8-year reign. The other ones that we're talking about, I just want to make sure we have all our Herods collectively here. This was Herod the Great. This is his fourth son, Archelaus. There's 3 other Herods. There's Herod Antipas that's in the Bible. And who is he? We're going to read about him next week with John the Baptist. He's the one that beheads him. Herod Agrippa. Relatives. He's the grandson of Herod the Great. And he's the one that has James killed. And he declares himself a god. That didn't last long. God made sure he suffered for that. And Herod Agrippa II gave Paul an audience, and he says, you remember that famous one? Almost persuadeth me to be a Christian. The time went on, these evil dictators pass on, and there's the next one to take him in place. And if you think about this, according to the studies, is Herod Agrippa II is the last one of the Herodian reign. almost persuaded him to be a Christian. But Joseph still wasn't sure about what was going on. Did he trust his return back into Israel? He did. He packed up. He left Egypt, the safety of Egypt that he had for several years. He's gone now and he's heading back, but he doesn't want to go the same way he came. He kind of goes around the side roads, takes the back streets, you could say, but he ends up back in Nazareth. And then you see this Matthew prophecy in verse 23, he's talking about which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. I looked that up. I couldn't find the exact words of a prophet that mentioned that Christ was going to be a Nazarene. He's saying he would be from Nazareth. But I have Psalms 22 and verse 6. But I am a worm and no man, reproach of men and despised of the people. Do you remember what John chapter 1, verses 45 and 46? There was a little conversation going on between Nathanael and Philip. Anything good come out of Nazareth? Nazareth has a bad reputation. In Isaiah 53 and verse 3, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. As he hid, as it were, faces from him, and he was despised, and we esteemed him not. He returns back to Nazareth, roughly 2 years of age. This is a lot of information covering a small portion of his time. Because then we don't hear anything left until he comes and turns to be 12 years old. 10 years pass. He's learning. He's gathering information. He's being a child. No documentation between this event that happens, his return into Nazareth, and then when he comes, and we go to Luke chapter 2, and we start talking about the events that we all probably familiar with, starting at verse 39, is the event that takes place where he is accidentally left at the temple. Remember that? When you look at Luke chapter 2 and verse 40, it describes the growth of children. And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. He was God, full of wisdom and grace of God. He was a boy that was now growing into a man. At 12 years old, it's a Jewish tradition that you are now a man. Bar mitzvah, I think that's what they call it. At this age, now you're responsible. You're supposed to be able to learn a trade, supposed to now move away from the kiddies' table in the temple, and now you're joining the men. Big responsibility shift at 12. I don't think my 12-year-olds at that point in time had that same mentality. They were still kids. The expectation back then was, especially as a poor carpenter, that he had to be able to help support his family. And we don't hear about, well, we're going to hear about Joseph in here, but he's talking about his human traits. He went from a baby to a boy, to a young man, to a man, and to his death. The Bible covers that whole thing. But he waxed strong in the spirit, filled with wisdom, and God's grace upon him. Grace and truth came through Christ. John, go ahead. That's where we're going. That's what we said in the temple. And we talk about his traits, about describing who he was. What is John chapter 1, verse 14? And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us and beheld his glory. The glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Different accounts. Luke's account, John's account. All showing that Jesus was doing his Father's business, learning, growing, maturing. He wasn't a rebel. He wasn't one of those like Barabbas that was going out seeking an earthly kingdom. He was following what he was supposed to be doing. Verse 46 of Luke chapter 2, and it came to pass after these 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. So evidently there's a journey to Jerusalem. And they went to temple, which they did every year, being a good, faithful, Old Testament Jewish person, following the rules. And then you would say, how could somebody leave their child and not know they were gone? I did that. Think about it for a minute. They had their family and acquaintances there with them. They traveled from Nazareth down to Jerusalem, probably in a big party, a big event, a big caravan. The males never traveled with the women. They had separated. I remember one time when we were on a beach house down in Carolina, and Matthew he's my third son. He likes to play games sometimes. So we're all packed up. We're all ready to go out to a restaurant or down to somewhere. We were heading out. And everybody was packed in the van. And when we were pulling out, I see my son staying in the house going like this at the window. He's the only one left. Karen was in another car. I was in another car. We both thought one had the other. It worked out. So we saw, I'm glad he was standing at that window. Because when we did a head count at the restaurant, he probably would have said, "Where's Matthew?" You can see how that happens. So when they realize this, 3 days have passed, they find him in the temple. They call them doctors. And I was thinking that was a physician. But doctors here means master teacher. This is a person well-versed in scriptures that can not only know, but can communicate them effectively. What a blessing to be at the feet of these master teachers at 12 years old. Got children at that age, they need to be here listening to these sermons. The feet of master teachers. Take advantage of that. We have been blessed in this church with master teachers. Over the long as I've been here, and even before that, many great teachers have been here. Master is used a lot of the times to describe Jesus. It's primarily referenced in the Gospels. Master, master, masters, all the time. You see master. It's a master teacher, a doctor. But sometimes it says, Paul likes to use the word teacher. So whenever you read his epistles, he talks about a teacher. It's the same context as doctor. He's a master teacher. They were amazed at his understanding. These are master teachers looking at a 12-year-old saying, this is amazing. The knowledge and understanding that this child has is phenomenal. Never had come across it ever before. He was a perfect 12-year-old little boy. Perfect. But he still had to go to work. But Mary, you can see her frustration in Luke chapter 2 and verse 48. He says, how can you leave this child? It takes 3 days to find him. Then you have the first recorded words of Jesus after 12 years. It says, how is it that you sought me, which thou not must be about my Father's business? No disrespect to his parents. It kind of seems flippant if you read it that way, but it's not. Jesus was showing his utmost respect for his parents and especially to his Father. Where else would I be? Why would you seek me? Knowing who I was for the last 12 years, why didn't you go to the temple first? I needed to be with these teachers. You can see the interest in the work. Jesus stayed in subjection to his parents, to his teachers. He grew mentally in wisdom. He grew physically in stature. He grows socially in favor with men, and he grows spiritually in favor with his Father. A lot of growing. Time does go too quick. So how do you recap Jesus' first 30 years? So when you put Matthew chapter 2 together and you put Luke chapter 2 together that talk about Christ, 18 verses talks about 12 years of his life. Not much, is it? I've talked more than that. But God doesn't seem to be necessary. He made his point very clear that this word is not meant to be an autobiography of Christ. I'm going to pull out certain aspects of my son's life. And I'm going to show you the important pieces of it, because I wanted to explain to you that here's your Old Testament that prophesies about my son, and here's where they came true, pointing them out specifically. And you read John chapter 21 and verse 25. And there are also many things which Jesus did in which, if they should be written, every one, I suppose that even the word itself would not contain the books that should be written. Amen. John understood that the life of Christ could fill not books big enough that this world can't even hold them. We have what we need. Don't try to fill in the blanks. Don't try to fill in what did Jesus do between 2 and 10 or 2 and 12. Don't try to fill in the blanks between 12 and 30 when he reappears again. We think we're smarter than God. We can figure that out. What is the difference? So itself, does it matter? It talks about his stature of who he was. And based on what we know about him, what is written, he wasn't really much of anything to look at. The Bible will always talk about how an appearance. What was Zacchaeus? Short. What about Saul? Not Saul Tarsus, King Saul. He was calling good looking, wasn't he? How about Goliath? The Bible will take certain times and call out stature to some point degree. That's a good looking man right there. That's a giant there. He wanted to make sure to put David up against a young shepherd against this huge man. Takes those and uses them very carefully. Why was Zacchaeus short? Because he made that extra effort to climb the tree to see Christ. Making the extra effort. Overcoming an obstacle. Jesus' obstacles. He wasn't a David. He wasn't a Goliath. He was a typical Jewish little boy. In a lowly manger, in a cow trough. Mm-hmm. And the Bible does describe Jesus. Isaiah 53 and verse 2, it says, "For he shall grow up before as a tender plant, And as a root out of dry ground, he hath no form of comeliness, or when shall we see him? There's no beauty that we should desire. It's like 98% of the country. We just blend in. He's not a 6'4", six-pack abs nailed to a cross. Long blonde hair. That's what artists portray. No form of comeliness means there's no splendor, there's no magnificence about seeing him. But being with him had a different interpretation. People saw him as who he was. It wasn't physical, it was all spiritual. The magnificence that Christ brought spiritually, not physically.
And you just describe that. But you know what, though? It also speaks to how amazing God is. God was the Lord. And he knows man looks on that parent, he's looking for this grandeur, this great warrior king. That's what they were looking for. This prominent leader. And yet God, he confounds the wise.
Looks to the heart, not the face.
So what God brought about was a spiritual giant. That's what came in this. We got someone he couldn't imagine that no man could have fathomed the Lord coming this way. And so yeah, show how God he is in his wisdom. Here comes Jesus, a very humble setting.
See the difference with Moses when he came down with the second tablets? His face was glowing. Everybody knew he was with God. You could see that same glow with Jesus through his words and his love. Yep. King of the Jews. That's what the Magi call him. So here's this king as a baby sitting in a manger. That doesn't seem right to a lot of people. He's not in a throne somewhere on this huge bed with many servants like Moses had. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Simone. Perfect. Just like a small manger, a small town in Nazareth. Yes, very good. Thank you. Small, amen. Respected the what? The form? Kind of hard to hear with the mask and the. Oh, yes. Yep, thank you. The poor. But one thing I wanted to make sure that we have all these questions that we could ask when we get to heaven. Yeah, if I find Jesus, go ask him any question you like. That's what Karen keeps telling me. When I ask too many questions, you want their phone number? You can call them. Said, no. But think about it here, that it's okay to run away. We learned that from Joseph. There's no shame in that. It says, what is that? To flee? It says, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. But he says, when they persecute this in this city, flee to another. We see that with Paul in Berea. When he was getting persecuted in Thessalonica, he ran to Berea. Run away. Don't waste your time. If you see danger, go. Heavenly questions to ask. One of the things that if you ever try to look up that span of time between Jesus in this temple at 12 until he appears as a 30-year-old later on, People will stick anything they want. You want to hear some of them? Ridiculous as they are. He studied Buddhism with the monks. He traveled to Tibet. Jesus was in King Arthur's court. He did walkabout in India and Persia. What's a walkabout? He actually traveled to Britain with Joseph of Arimathea. These are people making up unrealistic expectations. Put it logically. Even if I don't know the words, but I do know Christ from what has been given to me. He was an obedient child. He was always trying to do the will of his Father. He had a responsibility because after this event in Luke, being at 12 years old, we don't read about Joseph anymore. He may have been passed away. That could have left him with a responsibility now to provide for his mother. Learning his trade, carpenter skills all around the Galilean region, earning a living, going to temple, going to the synagogue, studying, preparing himself for this ministry that's about to happen that we'll talk about next week. But when you go there and you have all of these questions, I am not sure that you're going to remember them all. Write them down. So when you go to heaven, you can ask God and Jesus. Brother Mike.
Scriptures that I always look to when something's not written, and I'm wondering, hey, whatever happened in this thing? Is Deuteronomy 29:29. It says the secret things belong to God. But that which is revealed unto us belongs to us and our children. So that way it keeps me from doing all this speculation and coming up with things that are unscriptural.
We should focus on the things that we have written. Reading and understanding those and try to speculate what's not there. Wasting your time. Any other? Yes, Pat.
After the age of 12, he was preparing himself for
Yep. Possibly. When you get to heaven, you can ask. That's what I'm looking forward to. All right, that's all the time I have. Thank you very much for listening.